Sources are telling France 24 the government may try to force through this legislation without a vote by MPs. Well, let's go straight then to the National Assembly at the top of the hour. Our reporter Claire Paquelin is there. Claire, we spoke an hour ago. It's been rather busy since then. Just tell us what's going on.
Well, you could probably hear the drum roll behind me. That is the sign that the parliamentary session is opening. That said, what we're hearing, and is what's looking extremely likely now, is that the government has decided, Emmanuel Macron and his government have decided to use the 49.3 mechanism. That's part of the French constitution, which basically means that this reform will go through, the bill will become law without a vote in Parliament. Now, clearly the government and Emmanuel Macron didn't want to have to use this mechanism. It looks a bit like failure. They wanted democratic legitimacy by having a vote in Parliament and winning that vote in Parliament. But the way things were going, it looks like they were not going to get an absolute majority. They hadn't managed to persuade enough opposition MPs to join them. And so we are looking more and more likely that this 49.3 mechanism will be used and that pension reform bill will become law.
And Claire, you say the government didn't want it to happen this way. They wanted, in your words, democratic legitimacy. So how are we to understand what's happening right now? Is this not particularly democratic, this move the government is apparently undertaking this afternoon?
Well, certainly, I've just been speaking to opposition members of Parliament, a far-right opposition member of Parliament, Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, as well as a left-wing, a far-left one, Julien Bayrou. They have both told me that they are massively against the use of the 49.3 mechanism. So are their supporters. This is, people from opposite ends of the political spectrum, but who agree with each other on the fact that they feel that this is the government overriding the National Assembly, the lower house of Parliament. And despite the protests we saw in the streets, despite the opposition in the National Assembly, if the government does decide to use the 49.3 mechanism, well, then it looks very likely that this pension reform bill will become law.
Is there a precedent for this, Claire, of the government forcing through legislation like this because it believes it doesn't have the support it needs in Parliament?
It does happen, and in fact Elisabeth Borne has already used the mechanism for other smaller pieces of legislation. This is nothing particularly new. However, what's interesting in this case is that the government had said, and Emmanuel Macron had made it clear, that it was not the wish. It absolutely didn't want to have to resort to the 49.3 mechanism because it's such an emblematic piece of legislation. The government, Emmanuel Macron back in 2017 was campaigning on this. He wanted to overhaul the pension system. He didn't manage to do it in his first term as president, mostly because of the pandemic hit right at the moment when the reform was about to start going through Parliament. So before he ends his second and final term of president, we all understand that he really wants to get his pension reform through and that he's opted, or he's likely to opt, for this last resort, the 49.3. It's something that's been used before. Most prime ministers do use it. They dabble in it from time to time. But on this particularly large, emblematic piece of legislation, we are seeing that the government really wants to get it through, so it's cutting its losses. It looks like it's not going to go to Parliament for a vote, but we're still waiting to hear official confirmation on that. And of course, I'll be keeping you updated this afternoon on that.
Claire Paquelin at the National Assembly. Thanks very much indeed.